Hi, I'm Annabel Gray, and I'm a Senior Product Designer in Code Review. And I'm going to walk through the research I recently wrapped up about merge request user journeys and how the journey of both the author and reviewer changes throughout the merge request cycle. For a little bit of background, this research stemmed from the previous research synthesis I did regarding navigation and user flow. This one was I think this was September 2021. This was concerning previous research that's taken place over the last 1 to 3 years, I want to say, just concerning different aspects of the merge request page, whether that's navigation, widgets, comments, and that kind of thing. And the number one takeaway that I took from that was that it's overwhelming, lacks focus, and that the user flow can change depending on your role or where you are in the cycle. So the number one recommendation from that was to do an entirely new research study about the user journey. And that's exactly what this is. So in order to do this, I asked 10 internal GitLab team members to record themselves during every interaction with one merge request. So I asked 5 users to be the authors and 5 to be the reviewers. So basically that entailed, for an author, I wanted to capture the point where they pushed to the remote branch, and then how they created the merge request, what they did in the MR form, what things they filled out, what they didn't fill out, how long they waited before assigning to a reviewer. Did they review it themselves first? Did they wait for the pipeline to pass? What other aspects of the page did they use? Did they use the commits tab? And then they would stop recording once they were finished with their time with the merge request and once they had assigned it to someone else. And then they would record again when they got that merge request back. If there was feedback required or changes required or any kind of feedback, then they would again record themselves either making those changes or responding to the feedback. For reviewers, I wanted to see the point at which they received the notification, whether that was an email or a to-do, went to that merge request, and then what they looked at first. Did they click on the associated issue? Did they read the description? Did they immediately check out the branch to look at it locally? Did they look at previous comments if they were a second reviewer or third or fourth? And did they look at anything else on the page before digging into the code, and which tabs did they look at? So I wanted to see all that, and then subsequent reviews. If they requested changes, how they did that. Did they use quick actions? Which buttons did they use? Did they use the sidebar? What was their layout of the screen like? Did they have things expanded, collapsed? Did they use the file tree? Did they use single file mode? And then if they requested changes, the author would ping them again, and I wanted to see how they responded to those author's changes or comments. And then basically every part of the merge request process up until the merge, or up until they couldn't do anything else if they had to assign it to another reviewer or a maintainer. Then I watched those videos and wrote down a bunch of specific questions to do with those videos about what they did and why they did. So the overarching questions were: what does the user journey with MRs look like? What are their goals, and what do they value? Does it change over time? The insights that I came up with, I'm just going to kind of go over them now. Some of them are actionable, some of them are more conceptual, I suppose. So the first one, and this one came up with almost every single person as a common frustration, but developers need to constantly refresh the MR page to get an accurate depiction of the current state of an MR. No one trusts what they're seeing. As soon as they take an action, and that could be a comment, or if they, start a pipeline, use a quick action, or edit the sidebar, they seem to always refresh right away because they don't trust what they're seeing. And for somewhat good reason, a lot of the time we don't reflect the current status of the page. So if you were to, for example, approve something in a quick action in a comment, it probably isn't going to be reflected in the widget at the top until you do a refresh. Same if you add a label as a quick action, it's not going to be reflected in the sidebar. And if you then add an issue or add a label in the sidebar, they'll overwrite each other and they won't both work. Some widgets get stuck in a spinning state and a hard refresh will fix it. So the overarching thing is that they can make it work by refreshing the page, and that's not ideal. So it would just, that's probably the number one frustration that came out. I was kind of surprised to see that. The merge request tabs don't fit in well to the merge request workflow. So the list of pipelines isn't particularly useful to reviewers. The only two common cases I found when opening the pipelines tab is if the authors want to see and cancel a pipeline when they, let's say, push to a branch, then realize, oh, they made a mistake or they need to fix this test or they broke something. They'll push again, and then that should cancel the previous pipeline, but some people like to manually do that. And then maintainers frequently start a merge result pipeline. And I believe that if, at least within GitLab, if you're reviewing a community contribution, then you need to start a pipeline within the GitLab project because it's a fork. But we have a whole tab for that, and it's probably not the best use of a tab. The commits tab is useful to MR authors. I saw quite a few authors double check their commits. Either on the merge request creation page, they would check the commits to see, just to ensure they're seeing what they were expecting to see. And in fact, I did have one user realize that he had targeted the wrong branch. So the commits reflected that and he fixed it. The other use case is authors will copy their commit message from that tab and paste it into the merge request description. They can also get that from Gitlog and Terminal, but they use it that way too. But again, it's a whole tab, and it might not be, that information might be able to be displayed somewhere else. And then the comments appear in both the overview and the changes tab. And in this example is from a merge request, and it's got 168 forms of activity on the overview tab. Or I guess that's 168 comments actually. It can be confusing that they appear in both places, but sometimes they don't, because outdated diff comments only appear in the overview tab. So if you're purely looking at the changes tab, you're not going to see comments on diff lines that have been changed. And that depends developer by developer if they actually care about that information. If there's a comment on a line that's been changed, maybe they don't need to see it, but some people do want to see it, and it can be difficult to figure out and track all of the feedback and questions from all the reviewers. Reviewers and authors tend to ignore the report widgets, and this is another common theme. This wasn't like only a few people ignored them. I would say all of them did. The commonly used widgets were pipelines, approvals, and merge. And pipelines was kind of just a, did it pass? Yep, okay, carry on. If it failed, some reviewers and authors would want to go and click on that failure and figure out why. Approvals is, it's good to see if it's been approved or not. It's still a little bit confusing, and I'll go into that a little bit more later, but it is used. And then the merge widget that tells you, is it mergeable? People use that a lot. Authors, maybe not so much, and people without the maintainer permissions might not use it as much, but it's used by quite a few people. So as for the report widgets, like security one, for example, many of the users reported that the security widgets reported so many false positives in the past that they have been conditioned to just skip over them. I asked what they would do if they saw a critical vulnerability, and honestly, they sheepishly admitted that they didn't do anything because they don't know what it means and they don't trust it. A few people mentioned that things like that, if they're not going to fail the pipeline, they're not going to prioritize it. There's really no incentive. The pipeline passed and it's going to be ready to merge. The sidebars and activity can make the page feel cluttered, making code review more difficult. I think I touched on this a little bit in the last round of research, but in case you missed it, there are a lot of fixed elements on the page. So this is fixed, all the top stuff is fixed, this is, and then every header. And then if you're starting a review, there's this fixed footer. And then, oh yeah, I list them all here. So it it's difficult to kind of hone in on the code review. As a reviewer, you're trying to review the code. And this is when a lot of developers might jump to their local development environment, their IDE, or whatever they're using because they're used to it and they can focus on the code. Unfortunately, that means they have to switch between GitLab and their local environment quite a bit. And you can't see things like comments. And I think actually you can if you're using the VS Code extension. But anyway, it can be hard to figure out what's going on with all these fixed elements. And then in addition, the activity shows up on the overview tab. It can be really, really long. In this example, there's like 168 comments, and then the other forms of activity, linking to issues and adding labels, and it just becomes a lot. It's really hard to figure out where you are. It's hard to figure out the right comment. It's impossible to figure out what happened since you last looked at it if it's getting too long. So that's something that came up a lot. Leaving threads unresolved causes confusion for other reviewers. This one also surprised me. I didn't know this was a problem. Reviewers that are maintainers get frustrated if there's still a lot of open threads by the time it gets to them. When it gets to the final reviewer or maintainer, it should be almost ready to go. And if there are a bunch of open threads, especially if it's not in the same expertise as that maintainer, it kind of leaves it up to the maintainer to figure out what to do. So if you're a backend maintainer and there are a bunch of front-end threads open, but it's been approved, that maintainer has to figure out if they should just go and resolve them all, or ping the author again, or ping the front-end maintainer. So I think quite a few people said that it adds a lot of extra time to the whole process, and it's unclear what the right solution is. Developers like to add a summary comment before handing it over to the author or handing it over to the additional reviewer. So when an author is asking for a review, a comment has the following benefits. It allows the requested reviewer an easy and personable way to back out if they're busy. So for example, you might say, so-and-so, can you please review this? It has to do with this. And that person can, there's an immediate way to say, actually, no, I'm really busy and I forgot to put that on my profile. Can you ask someone else? Instead of just assigning without a comment. The author can call out specific parts of the merge request to make the review easier. And if you're assigning to multiple reviewers, say there's a back-end portion and a front-end portion, you can write a comment and say, front-end user, can you please check out this? And back-end user, can you please look at the back-end portion? It also helps the reviewer understand what role they're playing. Can you please do the final maintainer review and merge if it looks good? That kind of comment. And when the reviewer is handing it back to the author, the following benefits include you can thank the author first, which adds an element of kindness, which several users did mention. They like the writing a comment and adding things like emojis can add that kindness and human interaction where it can be otherwise lacking in this kind of transactional flow. And the reviewer can also summarize the feedback to provide a high-level info at a glance. I think an example here is, I didn't see anybody actually just assign a merge request without writing a comment first, which I thought was really interesting. So something like this, can you please do the front-end review? And the person said, can you please reassign? I didn't realize I forgot to put the out of office status. And he's like, sure, thank you for letting me know. There are emojis everywhere. It's very kind. And it's like, it's nice to see humans interacting with humans in that way. Speaking about comments, actually, I'm going to skip the previous one and move on to the conventional comments. So I saw many users, not all of them, but many of them used conventional comments to help structure the code review. It helps users get a quick glance at what the comment is about. It eliminates ambiguity as to whether the comment is truly blocking or not, even though technically all of our code comments are blocking. Sometimes you might write non-blocking, and it helps the author figure out what's going on. It could help non-native speakers of whatever the chosen language is avoid potential misunderstandings. It allows reviewers to praise authors with non-blocking comments, and which fosters collaboration and kindness, and it helps form actionable comments as well. So here's an example from a front-end maintainer, and she posted a question, and then, you know, in other parts of the review, she posted like suggestions and nitpicks, and it helps right away. You know what you're going to do with that comment. In this example, if she hadn't written question, the author might wonder if they need to do it, or if it's just a nitpick, or it just helps kind of form everything around a theme. It helps with communication overall, and I know it's something we've been discussing potentially adding into the product. There are extensions that help you like format these kind of conventional comments, but if we were able to add something like this in the product, we might be able to differentiate blocking threads with non-blocking threads depending on the conventional comment theme, I want to call it. So anyway, that has to do with comments too, and it was really great seeing everyone use this format. Difficult, so this goes back to the approvals widget. It's difficult to get a quick overview of who has already approved or who still needs to approve a merge request. If you're the last maintainer, it requires some mental gymnastics to understand if it already has all the necessary approvals. We don't show which team each user belongs to, so if an MR needs approval from all these different teams, you have to figure out who's missing. Here's an example of what we show, and I don't know which team that these people belong to. Same in the sidebar. And then I have this little snippet from one of the participants, which doesn't work. So I think this is the last one. Developers would rather use quick actions than interact with dropdowns, and that is dropdowns in the merge request form and all of the sidebar information. So I only saw one user use the sidebar, and when I asked about it, they said it's because they work on the sidebar in their team. So they're just kind of used to testing it. Otherwise, they would usually use quick actions. Some of the quotes are, sometimes it's too long to scroll up to the approve button, it's faster. This sidebar is frustrating to make changes to, it can feel clunky. The quick actions fit well in both the reviewers and authors workflows, like I said, with the merge request form and the sidebar. Reviewers add quick actions to approve, reassign, and merge. When some participants learned about the submit review quick action, they were excited to incorporate it into their workflows, and it might look something like this, which when you say it out loud, as I did in a meeting this morning, it doesn't sound very smooth, but it actually fits in very well to the developer workflow. You're already writing this comment. This looks great. Emoji. Submit the review, approve it, set the milestone, and if you want to merge it, you can do that too. But it eliminates all the scrolling that you might have to do. You just put everything in one place and then hit one button. And then you refresh the page, like I said earlier, because it's probably not going to be reflected. Authors use quick actions to add labels and milestones directly within the MR description. And again, that's just because sometimes the dropdowns are slow to load and it feels kind of clunky as a whole. Top takeaways. There are two. One is that users don't trust the information presented on the page, and that goes right back to that first insight that users have to refresh the page multiple times in order to trust what they're seeing. Every time they make a change, they have to refresh it. Sidebar doesn't update in real time, and the widgets frequently become stuck in a loading state. So if we're going to prioritize something on the development side of things, that would be a really good one. And the second huge takeaway is that the page layout needs improvement and refinement, which is very vague and big. The majority of participants ignored all the report widgets. Pipelines, approvals, and the merge widgets were the only ones consistently looked at. The pipelines and commits tabs don't fit in well to the workflow. the page can appear cluttered due to all the fixed elements in the long activity list, and the comments appear and occasionally disappear across tabs. So those are the top takeaways, and the actionable items from them include, fixing the real-time updates on the development side of things, and then for the page layout, redesigns are being considered, and it might have to be there. Each of these little improvements is very dependent on the other. So a larger redesign might be something that we need to consider. But those are the two priorities that I've taken away from this research. And that is it. So thank you so much.